Hello and welcome to episode 359 of AvTalk. I am Ian Petchnick, here as always with
Jason Rabinowitz. Hello, Ian. What's up?
Hello, Jason. It's episode 359. It is the A350-900 episode.
Yes, that's true. The original A350 episode.
This isn't in the show notes, but are you excited about a possible stretched A350?
Is that a thing? Are we going beyond the 1,000?
It is something that was talked about last week during Airbus's big kind of year in review
Annual press conference.
They hinted that it's possible there could be a stretched version of the A350 beyond the 1,000.
Would it be the 1,100 or the 2,000? Or can you really make that aircraft longer? I missed this.
They're going to try, I guess. Yeah, it was slightly, it was one of those, yeah, we're thinking about it, but we're not seriously there yet.
Maybe. You never know.
There you go. Exactly. You just never know. We'll talk a little bit more about Airbus later in the show. We're going to talk about more engine stuff and production and all that good fun stuff. But first, we're going to start with the snow because there was a lot of it.
Ooh.
Jason, have you dug out yet?
Yes. Actually, it's mostly melted already. This was a very different snow than what we had in January, where we stayed below freezing for like weeks on end. It's above freezing now, which is fantastic, several degrees above zero. But this blizzard, this historic blizzard, man, did it come out of nowhere. And that's why I'm home right now and not on the road recording, in a corporate building's gym or in a closet or something. It got me.
It got you good too. I mean, we're talking multiple iterations of trying to get to Dulles from New York. I think we went through
or just anywhere
18
really
travel arrangements.
Yeah, this one played out weird. Usually with the blizzard, you see it coming and forecasts will tell you, hey, next week something's cooking, and like, hey, 4 days from now, things are going to get pretty snowy. Maybe do something about it. But the storm was ramping up Sunday afternoon into evening, and Friday night, all the way up until Friday night, the forecast was like, yeah, we're probably going to get a bit of snow. It'll be a few inches or whatever, no big deal. And then everyone woke up Saturday, and apparently all the meteorologists drank some Red Bull or had some coffee, reread some models and said, oh, it's actually going to be an historic blizzard, and it's going to be like multiple feet of snow. And it starts tomorrow. Good luck. So that was a surprise, caught everyone by surprise. Flights in and out of New York, Boston, really everywhere in New England, I'd say, up from Philly all the way up to Maine, were canceled for nearly 2 full days. And then icing on the top, just as everything finally reopened at noon on Tuesday, today, Wednesday morning, we got a bit of a dusting of snow, which was just enough to throw all 3 airports back into chaos because everything that stayed overnight that came in after the blizzard then had to be de-iced to get back out, which when you have to do every airplane at once doesn't go all that well.
No.
But that one, that was a surprise. My original flight was on Monday. It was canceled on me. Obviously, I moved it to Tuesday. That was canceled again. And whenever I go down to Dulles, I also have mirrored Amtrak bookings because you never know. And again, I was booked on the same train consecutively 2 days in a row, and it canceled 2 days in a row. And I just gave up. I tried.
You did your best. You did your best.
I did my best. Amtrak servers did not do their best and went down completely on Monday night. So yeah, what a mess.
Well, let's talk about a different mess. Because while you were trying to get to Washington, D.C. yesterday, Congress was already there. And they were voting, the House specifically, was voting on the ROTOR Act. So this was the piece of legislation that had been proposed, bipartisan support coming out of the Senate. So this was Ted Cruz and Mary Cantwell over in the Senate. And they were crafting legislation that would address specific safety recommendations from the NTSB, not only in the wake of the midair collision in Washington, D.C., but also long-standing NTSB safety recommendations. So this was the Rotorcraft Operations, Transparency, and Oversight Reform Act. And this was passed unanimously in the Senate in December. And at the time of its passage, Assistant to the Secretary of War for Public Affairs and Senior Advisor Sean Parnell said, quote, "The Department of War thanks Chairman Cruz, Ranking Member Cantwell, Senator Moran, Senator Marshall, and Senator Duckworth for their leadership on the Rotorcraft Operations, Transparency, and Oversight Reform Act, which would enhance communications to improve aviation safety. The department supports this legislation and appreciates the Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation's continued partnership and dialogue to account for critical national security operations. The department looks forward to continuing the productive dialogue with the committee to finalize the bill and working towards its ultimate passage." That was December 17th.
Fast forward to February 23rd.
On February 24th, Tuesday, the same day the House voted on the bill, the same Sean Parnell said, quote, "The bill would create significant unresolved budgetary burdens and operational security risks affecting national defense activities. Further, the Senate version, quote, does not reflect several of the mutually discussed updates negotiated with the Commerce Committee."
Didn't know the Department of Defense ever really cared about cost concerns, because it's like half of our federal budget. So that's not a legitimate concern on their part. All of a sudden, just flipped on a dime, and suddenly what they were backing, what they said is good legislation and will help prevent future disasters, suddenly, no, we can't do it because of security concerns we're not going to tell you about, and cost concerns that don't really matter.
So what did the ROTOR Act require, and why the about face from the Department of Defense? The ROTOR Act required the adoption of ADSB in any place that ADSB out was already required, and would create a rulemaking committee to study the feasibility of mandating ADSB in all controlled airspace within the U.S., so even very small airports. As far as the Department of Defense is concerned, the ROTOR Act would significantly limit the DoD's ability to operate without active transponders in the national airspace system. So prior to the crash in Washington, D.C., the DoD had been using its exemption from the original ADSB mandate law that allowed the DoD to conduct flights that included sensitive government missions without an active ADSB transponder. The DoD had taken that definition of sensitive government missions and expanded it to training missions and carriage of sub-cabinet level members of government. The ROTOR Act removed that exemption, and it also requires that Congress be notified if the more limited exemption that the ROTOR Act puts into place is used more than 5 times in a given month. So these are the rules that are actually in place at the moment based on the FAA's emergency powers. So this would have codified the emergency rules that are in place as part of the FAA's ability to make these rules on an emergency basis. The DoD's issue here becomes one of, they claim to have a national security concern, which is interesting given that there are still exemptions within the ROTOR Act. It doesn't prevent them from using those exemptions. They just need to notify Congress and say, hey, we're using these exemptions. And they don't need to notify them ahead of time. They just need to notify them within 2 weeks if they use them more than 5 times within a month.
Mere paperwork is all that was.
So that's one of the issues raised by the DoD. Elsewhere, there's the argument that there's a competing bill. Some folks would say it's not a competing bill. It's a companion bill that addresses some of these same issues. So families of the victims of the DC midair collision were in favor of the passage of the ROTOR Act, and they wrote a letter to the Senate sponsor, Senator Cruz, saying, quote, while we recognize that additional work remains to fully address all NTSB recommendations, ROTOR is a critical step that can reduce known and documented risks in our airspace today. Acting now does not preclude further reform. It begins it. And the argument from some of the congressional staffers as well as congresspeople in the House said the ROTOR Act is very prescriptive. It says what the FAA has to do. It says what the DoD has to do. And it doesn't address holistically all 50 of the safety recommendations that came out of the NTSB's final report on the DC midair collision.
There's been a lot of back and forth, and there's a good New York Times article that we'll link to in the show notes that sums a lot of this up. But there seems to be, I'm not going to say intentional misrepresentation, but potentially a knowledge gap here wielded by those in Congress, which wouldn't be the first time, certainly won't be the last time. But the Times quotes Sam Graves, a Republican from Missouri, and unfortunately the chairman of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, on the House floor, saying that the systems required by the ROTOR Act are, quote, emerging technology that could cause, quote again, operations crisis. Really don't know what that means, nor does Jennifer Homendy, the chairwoman of the NTSB, who calls them just straight out false. We think, or what's assumed is the technology he's talking about is ADS-B-In, which is absolutely not an emerging technology. Applications of it in commercial aviation may be emerging, but the technology itself is absolutely not emerging. Hell, the Twin Otter operated by Win Air I flew in St. Martin a couple of weeks ago, that had ADS-B-In, which is actually quite interesting as a passenger peering over the shoulders of the pilots, looking at the other air traffic around us in very congested airspace. It was helpful for me even as a passenger, but that is in no way an emerging technology. And I cannot possibly fathom how requiring ADS-B-In would cause operations crisis. That is nonsensical. But that wasn't all Miss Jennifer Homendy had to say, was it?
No, it was not. Because after the failure to pass the ROTOR Act yesterday, I will note by one vote in Congress. The one thing to note here is that the bill had considerable support. It was yes votes were 264 in the House. So it had considerable support. But because of the way the bill was advanced through the House, it required a 2/3 majority to pass, and it missed that by one vote. So after the bill failed to pass, NTSB Chair Jennifer Homendy just simply asked, how many more people have to die?
Basically, the actual quote was, how many more people need to die for us to decide that action needs to be taken? Jennifer Homendy is not someone who is afraid to say what she's thinking and does not mince words. So I am not surprised at all to hear this from her. I have a feeling we'll be hearing more from her in the coming weeks. But this must have just been absolutely crushing from the point of view of the NTSB to have the ROTOR Act fully encompassing all 50 of their recommendations on the FAA
so
side.
This is where I agree. The ROTOR Act doesn't encompass all 50 of the recommendations, but it seems that the House is taking the view that if they pass the ROTOR Act, they can't pass the Alert Act. And rather than viewing them as necessarily competing bills, it's certainly possible to view them as companion bills. And yes, there is some conflict about how that would work, and those things would need to be worked out. But I don't think it's one of those things where they're mutually exclusive or their goals are mutually exclusive. So we'll see where we go from here. And as Jason mentioned, Jennifer Homendy, who chairs the NTSB, is not a stranger to arguing vociferously for safety improvements. And to that end, we will in fact be talking with her on next week's episode of the podcast about safety improvements, about the NTSB's mission in general, and frankly, what we do from here to advance the cause of safety in the wake of the ROTOR Act's failure to pass this week.
All right. I merely alluded to the possibility of talking to her. You just put it out there. Okay. No secrets here on this podcast.
We're adding it to the schedule. No, I want people to tune in next week because I think it's going to be a fantastic conversation. So stay tuned for that.
Rightfully so.
So stay tuned for that next week, and we will, I'm sure, revisit the topic. Speaking of topics revisited, Spirit, Jason, they say they have a plan.
That's great. Do we know what it is?
Sort of.
Less. Kind of.
That
is
flights
up in the air. Kind of.
Better.
Sort of.
More premium.
They've got 3 bullet points. The key aspects of the new Spirit. This is big. And optimize the network, they say. More premium choices. And Ian, stronger financials.
Oh, that's good.
That's a 3 bullet point plan to success. This time, they mean it. What we're talking about here is Spirit plans to emerge from Chapter 11 bankruptcy again, late spring or early summer. They have a plan, they say, to this time.
They probably still have the sign from the last time they emerged from bankruptcy.
You could just dust it off. That's stronger financials. You don't have to print the same materials again. You've already got it. So optimized network, they say they're going to align its network and capacity to routes and periods of strongest demand, higher aircraft utilization during peak days while reducing off-peak flying, as well as the flexibility to adjust to seasonal demand across markets. Why weren't they doing that already? More premium choices, so more of the same here. They were already rolling out or were going to roll out at some point. First class seats or premium economy, that is still an ongoing thing. Stronger financials, they just say they will reduce their cost structure, expanding cost advantage compared to legacy airlines, and apparently their debt's going to be reduced from $7.4 billion to approximately $2.1 billion post-emergence, which is a big difference. Growing by shrinking, we know, does not work. Will it work for Spirit this time? Who knows? A lot of nice A320neos and CEOs in yellow, if you like it, out there on the market, though.
That's true, except the 2 that they chopped up and sold for parts. But
what the actual plan is, they're not saying just yet. But stay tuned, because this time it's going to be different.
Exactly. Over the weekend, actually, there was a military operation in Mexico to capture one of the most notorious drug cartel leaders. That capture then led to cartel violence at multiple airports in Mexico, including Puerto Vallarta and Guadalajara. Both of those airports canceled, or not the airports, but airlines at those airports canceled many flights. Some continued to operate, which is...
Did they? Really?
Interesting to me. Things were relatively back to normal by Tuesday, but Sunday and Monday it was quite scary. There were shelter-in-place orders from the local government, and then other embassies telling their citizens, including the U.S., Canada, telling their citizens to shelter in place. Don't try and get to the airport because there are flaming roadblocks and roaming gunmen. Not necessarily something you want to encounter when you're trying to make your flight. So airlines canceled a ton of flights at these 2 airports in particular. But then on Tuesday, things seemed like they were back to normal. Airlines moving again. A pair of Canadian airlines, including Air Canada and Air Transat, sent larger aircraft. So Air Canada sent, in place of a MAX 8, they sent a 787-9, and Air Transat, instead of a 321neo, sent a 330-300 to move more passengers and get folks moving home. But just another aviation impact from geopolitical machinations.
Yeah, that was another one of those events that I only learned about through receiving an email from United about a change waiver being issued, which seems to be the way I learn about a lot of worldwide events. It must be a nonstop, never-ending job at a global airline to know about all of the things happening at all of the places you not only operate to, but also fly over about what's going on there, what's bursting into flames on the road, on the approach to the airport. I would love to better understand how airlines keep track of all of this because they seem to do it very well, very quickly.
We can talk more about that. So I'm not prepared to answer that question at the moment, but we can definitely do that. And I think that would be a fun episode to have, because the answers are both incredibly complex and also comically mundane.
Those are the best,
depending on what we're talking about. Yeah. All right, we'll come back to that. That's a good idea for a future episode. I've added that one to the notes. Let's head to Germany now, where we've got a couple of good stories, and they both center on Munich. Today, Lufthansa brought home the A380 painted in the airline's special centennial livery. Registration.
Is a looker.
It is DAIMH. So Mike Hotel came home today to Munich. It looks very, very good. And I can't wait to see it. The only photo I've seen is on the ground so far. I cannot wait to see a flying photo of it, because I think the double deck crane, I think just looks very good.
Yeah, I only just learned from someone on social media that it had, I don't remember where, but a top-down view of it, the crane's wings on the Centennial livery are...
No, Jason, you learned this from the podcast when they came out with it, and I explained all
I don't
that.
remember that. I don't remember that. I only learned about this yesterday because I actually saw the picture of it from above, which we didn't have at the time, but we have it now. But on the A380, at least the rendering, it's... I never listened to you, but it's all that much more evident on an aircraft quite this large. But what a turnaround story for Lufthansa's A380 from being completely sidelined, removed from the fleet. What did Kristen Flores say at the time? Like, there would have to be some tremendous otherworldly return in travel demand for us to bring the A380 back. And now it wears their 100th anniversary centennial livery. What a comeback.
What a comeback indeed. That's the good news at Munich. Jason, what else happened at Munich?
It's all downhill from there. Apparently, it snows in Germany sometimes, and they don't quite handle it as well as we do here in New York, which is a real low bar. But out in Munich, apparently, it snowed quite a lot. And not only Lufthansa, but a number of airlines, I'm paraphrasing from an article here from The Independent, pushed back or had late departures from Munich, which has a very strict curfew.
We have talked about the Munich curfew before, most recently a Condor flight, I think from...
They were a minute late.
Maybe a year ago. Not even a minute. I mean, they were over the threshold of the runway when the clock ticked over.
Well, in this case, they actually extended the curfew by an entire hour to 1 a.m., but de-icing is very difficult, especially when it's wet, heavy snow. It takes a long time to de-ice aircraft, especially if you have to do a whole bunch of them, and you might have to do it multiple times for whatever reason. But a bunch of flights late in the day, delayed, pushed back, went out to get de-iced, and for whatever reason were not able to get out before the 1 a.m. curfew. And that's where things really went downhill, because an airport with a curfew, they turn into a pumpkin overnight, and everyone goes home and they turn off the lights and everyone comes back the next day, which is really unfortunate if you're operating flights and you can't bring them back to the gate or do anything or even get passengers off the plane because, quote, all bus drivers had already gone home. So you had situations where passengers were on a short-haul configured aircraft, and if you've ever been on a Lufthansa A320, you do not want to be on that aircraft for more than an hour or two. But passengers were trapped on board the entirety of the night because there was no staff on the ground to drive a bus up to the aircraft and bring passengers back to the terminal, which was not even open, which is really kind of shocking that this would be allowed to happen at all, that the airport would allow its staff to just abandon flights that are out on the ramp out there or wherever they were being de-iced on a pad and just saying, okay, we're done going home. Apparently, they have apologized. Lufthansa has apologized to their passengers for this unacceptable situation, and Munich Airport is doing everything it can to make sure that does not happen again. But I am really curious to know how somebody at Munich Airport obviously knew this was going on and still said, yeah, whatever. It is what it is. They're stuck for the night. Like, that should never be allowed.
Rules are rules, Jason. Rules are rules.
But this is...
rules are rules.
Okay, rules are rules. Rules are rules. You're right. Should never have been allowed to happen, but sometimes, snow gets the best of all of us.
In a follow-up and hopefully conclusion to a story that we first talked about probably a year ago now, the Serious Fraud Office in the UK has concluded its investigation, and now the director of AOG Technics, Jose Alejandro Zamora Irala, will spend 4 years and 8 months in prison for more than 60,000 counterfeit CFM engine parts sold between January 2019 and July of 2023. The company made $10 million in that time, and the Serious Fraud Office says 90% of that was from fraud.
All right. Consequences. We've actually got some consequences. It's so rare these days. I mean, not exactly like Madagascar that kind of like rounded up half the country and prosecuted them for fraud.
That brought down the government basically.
Yeah, that was an interesting one. But I hope they're able to round up some additional people here just than this one person with far too many words in their name. But man, 90% of your business being fraud, I feel like that's above average, even for like a mafia run front. Like they're probably.
I mean, what's really interesting to me is that there was 10% where it was legitimate. Like,
yeah, where does that come from?
Commit. Why not just commit
at 90%? Like, yeah, just go to the full 100%. Why? Nobody's buying 10%. Like that's crazy. But apparently, 60,000 engine parts sold from January 2019, so before even the COVID supply chain crunch. So this has been going on for a long time, to July 2023. That was allowed to go on for far too long. And I don't know how far along the aviation industry is in digitizing records for parts. Probably not that far along. Talking about emerging technologies there, but not great. But at least there was consequences for one person.
Yeah, well, more than one person, but this person was the central director for this, and
not a whole lot of jail time though, or prison time. How long was it? 4 years.
4 years, 8 months.
That's not a whole lot of time for $10 million worth of 90% fraud.
That's I don't make the rules. Well, I just read the page that has the rules on it.
That's true. A lot of rules discussion this episode. Good thing he wasn't in Munich. There would have been so many.
He'd still be stuck on the plane.
Just lock him in a Lufthansa A320 for 4 years, 8 months. He'll never commit a crime again.
God, that is prison in itself. Let's talk about some orders, deliveries, and the business of making and delivering aircraft. We have 2 finalized orders and expanded orders from Vietnam. So these were first placed as part of the recently signed trade agreement between the United States and Vietnam. So New Airline, which up until now has only had Airbus A320 family aircraft, has ordered, Sun Phu Quoc has ordered up to, according to Boeing, 40 787s. The airline on its part says 40. That's the number we ordered. So somebody needs to talk to somebody else to see how many aircraft they've actually ordered. But that's a lot of 787s.
It's also a weird one from an airline I've never heard of before. They're very new. They seem to be going down the same path as Bamboo did. We know how that turned out for a Bamboo. It was really not good. But it seems to be the same exact path, except this Vietnamese airline kind of reminds me of also Allegiant's failed attempt at like doing all of the things where they also had resorts and they tried to keep everything in-house and that didn't work for Allegiant. But apparently this Vietnamese startup wants to be a very premium, very international 787 heavy airline. And there are so many airlines before them that have tried to do this that have failed spectacularly, up to and including other Vietnamese companies. So I don't know. I do just love the rendering of the 787 that has this magnificent built-out airport that doesn't actually exist and may never actually exist at their hub that I'm pretty sure also doesn't exist right now. So a lot of hypotheticals being thrown around with this airline.
A very rendered scene. But on the other side of, yeah, this makes sense and I can understand things. Vietnam Airlines has firmed an order for 50 737 MAX 8. So that one
that's
is
a real
much
airline.
more straightforward order. Hey, we want some planes. We talked about Airbus's year in review press conference. As part of that guidance, Airbus talked about how many A320neo family aircraft it wants to build per month. Now they are targeting, instead of 75 per month by the end of 2027, they're only targeting between 70 and 75. Because
so
of the
range
continued,
instead of just a
range now. Yes.
I feel like it always should have been a range.
You got to have a number, I guess.
There's so much more leeway there.
Yeah, this is continued engine supply constraints. So we're dealing with engine supply constraints for the Pratt & Whitney geared turbofan engines and the CFM LEAP 1As. So continued supply constraints all the way through the end of time at this point.
Yeah,
I don't think we'll ever get to the point where we have enough engines.
Yeah, it seems like whatever happened during COVID, this is the new normal. It's never changing. It's never getting better. The supply chain will always be broken. And until we get to the next generation of engines, which hopefully is a little less bleeding edge, it's never getting any better, is it?
It doesn't seem like it, no. But if you want to assemble aircraft and you need a different place than your current final assembly line, you could say change from Brazil to India, which is what Embraer is going to do. They've signed an enhanced MOU with India.
I didn't know that was such a thing. I thought you went from a memorandum of understanding directly to a letter of intent to a memorandum of understanding to an actual firm deal. So this is somewhere in the middle.
This is an enhanced memorandum of understanding.
Operates E-175s in India?
Nobody?
What?
But they're going to build them there.
So usually when you insource or outsource, I guess, production of an aircraft, it's because there's some reason you need to build them in that country. So in the US, you have the A220s built in Alabama and the A320 family, of course, because there are either so many aircraft in that country that it makes sense, or because there's some other stupid reason like tariffs being put in place. Airbus has its A320 final assembly line in Tianjin, China, because there are just so many Airbus narrow bodies going to Chinese airlines. But why a final assembly? I assume this is a final assembly line in India, but I can't name a single Indian airline that operates any Embraer aircraft or even has any on order. Or am I just not thinking of any off the top of my head?
If you build it, they will come.
Or if you build it there, it'll just be cheaper.
So this is a consortium of Embraer, Indian defense and aerospace contractor, the Adani Group, as well as Hindustan Aeronautics. They would manufacture the aircraft locally because India is scrapping custom duties on airframe and engine components. So interesting nonetheless, but we'll see. It's only an enhanced MOU.
So it may never happen, but it's very interesting because this isn't really to aid Indian aviation or to build them closer to home. It's not like Air India has an outstanding order for 100 E-175s. That's only for American, Delta, and United to do. But I guess it's probably just cheaper to build there.
That too. Let's talk about Frontier. Well, we're talking about things that are cheaper, sort of.
Yeah.
What are they up to, Jason?
Unless you fly out of JFK. Then the Great Frontier experiment that seems to have come out of nowhere back in 2024 is now nearly entirely gone, which is really interesting. So it's a great breakdown because, of course, if there's a topic like this, Brett Snyder over at Cranky Flyer will have a breakdown, and indeed he does. of the divergent paths of Frontier operating at JFK and LAX, two very high-cost airports. But while they continue to ramp up LAX, they have almost entirely gutted JFK, leaving only a flight to Atlanta, likely because that's another base for Frontier. But all of the flights from to, I guess, they had flights to San Juan, LAX, Miami, Orlando, Tampa. They had a lot of flights seemingly out of nowhere. They came into JFK, and just like that, they're all gone. But they're still building up LAX until they don't. But that was interesting times to see an ultra low cost carrier like Frontier at JFK, because LAX is LAX. It gets everyone. It gets Spirit, it gets Allegiant, it gets Frontier, but JFK is not somewhere you'd expect to see Frontier. And apparently they now agree.
They've run the numbers and they agreed with the original assessment of everyone but themselves.
Yeah, they're currently use the old Terminal 7 for their operations at JFK, and maybe the days are numbered for that terminal. Maybe they looked at the new Terminal 6 and said, whoa, that's too fancy for us. We're out of here.
Fair enough. A couple stories to close the show this week. One is a Flight Radar 24 story. So this week,
I've heard of them.
Yes, briefly. This week, we fully enabled global space-based ADSB with Aireon's data integrated into Flight Radar 24. So while it's within our terrestrial coverage network or other space-based networks that we pull data from, you'll see those. But otherwise, you'll get to see flights tracked by satellites with Aireon's data. So that comes in 15-minute increments when it is outside our coverage area. So this is full coverage over the oceans, over the poles, over
even
the
over
Sahara.
the poles, really?
Even over the poles. Yep. So this is everywhere all the time. So very cool to be able to plug that gap and be able to keep on tracking those flights even outside of our traditional coverage where we lack terrestrial coverage or otherwise lack coverage. You can notice those in the app or on the site with a thin blue outline around the yellow icon. Or if you click on the flight and it's being tracked by Aireon, it'll say in the banner just below the photograph of that particular aircraft. So have a look at that and go check that out. That is available across all the platforms. So web, Android, and iOS at the moment. And on the flip side, if you're listening to this thinking, I'm an air navigation service provider or a national government or something like that, and I'm looking for data, Flight Radar 24 data is also now integrated into Aireon products as well. So those products are now enhanced by unique data that we can offer that Aireon doesn't necessarily have on its own.
Neat. And
so
yeah, you really you have to really zoom in on the map in places you wouldn't ordinarily zoom in on the map to see some of these flights, like Haneda to Frankfurt. Hey, didn't we just talk about them last week? They are not returning this week. They are continuing on.
For a second.
Now, you have to zoom in really in a place on the map you wouldn't ordinarily zoom in. And there they are, tracked by satellite. They've got this very, very, very faint blue line around them. And there they are, tracked in a place where I don't think you can stick a receiver. But it still surprises me to this day when I zoom in and play a run on the map that there is a flight not all that far southwest of that one, Haneda to Paris, which is apparently being tracked by terrestrial ADSB. And where the hell is that receiver? Because there is nothing out there.
There's always an island somewhere.
But yeah, it's using the map in ways Apple didn't really ever intend to be zooming in on. Coverage everywhere. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Or should I say, really cool?
You should say really cool.
Why?
Because this last story comes to us from Really Cool Airlines. Yes, that is their actual name, or will be when they eventually get going. This is a startup airline out of Thailand. And I was going to make this a brief mention and just say, hey, there's an airline called Really Cool, whatever. But then I started reading this article from CH Aviation, and it actually is super interesting what they're doing, or rather why they're doing it. So the airline was planning to launch with A330-300s. Now they are revising their submission to the Thai regulator to get an AOC for 777-200ERs. And they're doing that because the leasing costs for the A330 more than doubled in the period they went from starting with this idea to getting to the point where they said, no, we can't make the economics work if we do that. This has been in process for a while. They also briefly considered A350s, which they were going to pick up when Qatar was in its fight with Airbus and was not accepting any A350s. And Airbus was getting to the point where they were going to start remarketing those.
Ooh,
those costs have also doubled as well. So the A330 leasing costs went from about $200,000 per month and are now about $450,000 per month.
Ouch.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
I don't know much about this airline. I'm just browsing their website now, and there hasn't been an update since 2024, which is not a good sign. But I want to know more. So I clicked on their About Us page, and I'll quote the line here. Really Cool Airlines is a full-service international airline that distinguishes itself by incorporating innovation and technology into its services to create interest and open new market opportunities. Word salad?
Sure.
Sure, why not? I feel like
Great.
that's every airline in the world that distinguishes itself by incorporating innovation and technology into its service to create interesting and new market opportunities. That's meaningless. I like its logo, though, and I like its livery, and I hope to see it on an actual
a 777-200
ER one day, although the rendering on its website is still an A350, so what the heck is going on with this airline? I don't know. They should probably update their website a little bit, maybe, because they say 2025 takeoff. Last time I checked my calendar, it's no longer 2025.
Well, there's that.
I'm going to watch it.
We'll have to
video,
see.
Though.
We'll have to see what happens. All right. We're going to call that an episode so Jason can go watch the promo video. This has been episode 359 of AvTalk. Don't forget to tune in next week when we speak with NTSB Chair Jennifer Homendy. That is sure to be a fantastic conversation and one that I'm very much looking forward to. I am Ian Petchnick, here as always with
Jason Rabinowitz. Thanks for listening.